I am Claude Kabemba. I am the Executive Director of the Southern Africa Resource Watch, which is a Pan-African think tank, but also an advocacy institution that promotes good governance of Africa's natural resources. Today, there is a scramble for what is now known as critical minerals, which really are for us Africans strategic minerals or green minerals, to respond to the requirements for the energy transitions. As you know, we are moving from an economy based on fossil fuels to an economy powered by renewable energy. And these critical minerals are essential for a sustainable manufacturing of renewable technology. But beyond energy, these critical minerals are also important for defense. As you know, the geopolitics today, the competition among great powers is not only defined by economic dominance, but also on defense. And these minerals also are required in defense. They are also required in artificial intelligence. So whoever controls these minerals will dominate the world, literally. And for the past decade or two, China has invested massively in these critical minerals on the African continent. And China came on the continent when Western companies and Western government were retreating, were getting out of the continent. Most of the mines that China has in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in Guinea, they all belong to Western companies. China bought them. Today, China controls between 70 to 80% of these resources on the African continent. Now that these critical minerals have become so important and strategic, the West are coming back. They want to cut that Chinese dominance. And that has created a lot of discussion on the African continent. How do we react to this geopolitical competition over these resources? But we also think, just as here we are discussing, but also at the different levels of on the continent, from the African unions, from our economic regional blocks, from at the national level, all our governments are making declaration that we do not need to export raw critical minerals anymore. We need to add value to these minerals for our own industrialization, because when we export these raw materials, we are exporting jobs, we are exporting development, we are exporting technology. So there is a consensus that has emerged on the continent that we need to add value. But you can't add value simply by talking. You need to add value by having in place policies or strategies, policies, and the implementation plan. We've seen the emergence of new strategic plan on the continent. Zambia has one, South Africa has produced one. We are seeing Tanzania thinking and coming up some policies. The DRC is in the process of finalizing his critical mineral strategy. And we have some policies across the board. But policies on its own are not enough. For us to add value to these minerals, I think we need definitely two things. We need industries and we need skills. That way it becomes important for the continent to move away from rhetoric and starting to implement. And the Pamoja critical minerals here support that drive for value addition on the continent, support the value addition that supports sustainable development on the continent. Now, the challenge now is that while we are talking about value addition, we are also cognizant of the fact that there isn't one only African country that can achieve it on its own. We need unity. Africa needs to work, African government, African people needs to work together to be able to compete with the like of China, the United States, or the EU, or any other emerging powers, such as India, Pakistan, Turkey, the Arab countries. They all want to have access to these minerals. And the strategy that they are using is dividing the African continent. And that division is happening very transparently. They are coming to sign bilateral agreement. On the one side, you want unity. On the other side, you are signing bilateral agreement. That's why you see most of them, without exception, they are pushing for bilateral agreement with, with our countries and our government. And that's the biggest weakness. We are hoping that we will be able to block that race to the bottom, because what that approach does, it allows us to compete against each other to attract investment. And when we compete, that's when we give these tax holidays, exemptions, and we compete among ourselves and we weaken our capacity. Now, we also need to be true to ourselves. The industrialization and the value addition we are talking about will not happen tomorrow because we don't have the basics in place. In the meantime, we need to ensure that as we move towards value addition, we also collect sufficient revenues from these minerals, because the global market the price is very high. If we are able to maximize revenues from some of these critical minerals, we are able to use those finances to diversify our economies and to invest in the critical sectors that will support industrialization. Now, we have problems with transparency, accountability, issues of corruption on the continent for us to maximize those revenues. So, that approach should not be forgotten. Now, the problem also that we are facing is that we are seeing countries banning export of raw materials. We just saw it in Zimbabwe now. They banned the export lithium. We support those type of drive from our government, but they cannot be done because of politics. They have really to be done after a strong reflection on what do we really want to achieve when we ban. Do we have the full capacity to add value to lithium? If we don't have, are we banning to stockpile lithium? What is the real reason for banning lithium export? We support value addition, but we need to quickly build the capacity. We know Zimbabwe is building the capacity to refine lithium in the country, but are we ready to totally ban export? Some of the strategies that we've seen across the world for countries that have got abundance of this, there's reserve that they put. They don't export everything. They also don't extract everything. So I don't know what strategy the Zimbabwean government is using or what are the reasons. But there is a difference between what happened in the Democratic Republic of Congo when the government there banned the export of cobalt, is because the DRC, which has the producer power, would produce 70% of cobalt in the world, can play around with that policy of banning export. Because outside the DRC, you cannot have that capacity, that quantity the world needs. So the DRC banned because they wanted to fix the price of cobalt, which was decreasing. And they were losing revenues. So by banning the export, they wanted to increase the price of cobalt, and they succeeded. Today, cobalt is fetching at quite a very high price. But beside that, they moved to the second tier of policy, was quotas. Now they've introduced quotas. Companies are not allowed to export anyhow. There are quotas that they have been given to export, is just to stabilize the price of cobalt. So there are many reasons that government will ban export of certain minerals when they need revenues to pay for public service, to pay teachers, to invest in education. Just banning for the sake of it, for me, does not make a lot of sense unless there is a clear explanation that we've achieved the capacity to refine, to process, and to export finished goods. We will applaud, because this is what we are doing here. We are supporting African government to invest in value addition, so that we become a manufacturer's continent, not an exporter of raw materials. It's not the first time we see the scramble for these resources. It has always been with us, because we have never really controlled our resources. The scramble is happening because of the energy transition. The scramble is happening because of high competition between the great powers. Each one wants to control these resources, but I think for me is that this transition from a fossil fuel economy to a renewable type of economy has found Africa unprepared to benefit from it. We are unprepared simply because we don't invest in what matters. Because we don't have the capacity to add value, to transform this on the continent. On the other side, we want money, and we can only get money from these resources. There's no other option than to sell them the way we are selling them. So for me, the scramble simply reflects on the weaknesses of the African continent. And I think if we do not redefine ourselves, and we don't invest very quickly on the basics for us to be able to capture, to control these resources, they will continue to go out. And I bet with you, we will never stop that if we can't invest in critical infrastructure, in industries, but more importantly, building skills of young people to be able to think, to innovate, and produce new type of industries for us to use our resources for our own development. 3%. The biggest problem we have is how do we access energy and reduce the use of fossil fuels. Most of our rural communities, they use fossil fuels for their energy, cooking and so on. We need to quickly reduce that. And if you are going to reduce that, critical minerals become important. Critical minerals are also important for energy production, energy storage. if we can transform, we can use our critical minerals to produce energy for some of these communities and reduce reliance on fossil fuels, we will contribute to the positive energy transition. We also need to critically think around the issue of food security. Climate change is seriously affecting food security. How do we innovate our agriculture output to ensure that, because one of the biggest source of climate change problems is also from agriculture. How do we create a new way of producing our food in a sustainable way, where we support small, medium, and big farmers? Most of our farming communities are small holding farmers, and that has become a difficult situation for the African continent to secure food security. We import a lot of our food, which we should not be doing, since we've got the best Arab land, we've got water on the continent, and so on. So my sense is that those two, access to energy for the 600 million who do not have, and food security, new way of producing, I think we would have mitigate significantly our impact on from climate change. But one of the biggest things is that climate change is with us. We are the victim of others' pollution. But we don't have the technology to protect ourselves against that. That's why we are asking that we start producing finished goods on the continent, the batteries and so on, so that we can bring people in a position where we are able to shift away from an economy that is not sustainable in a transition that we want to move away from fossil fuels. So my sense